their child. And therefore the religion of Islam recognized that the father has a fundamental role. Hence you notice whether it's our Prophet's statement of how a father has to bring up the child, or Amir al-Mu'mineen's statement of how you should bring up your children in a different way from the way you were brought up. There is a major emphasis on the ahadith about the rights of the father. That's why, as an anecdote to begin the examination, you find as an anecdote that the most important role of the father in the 21st century is the amount of time they give their child. Because time is truly a treasure, and the upbringing of a child in the 21st century. An anecdote comes forward which states that there was a father sitting with his child one day. When sitting with that child, the child comes to the father and says to him, "Father, how much do you earn an hour?" The father replied by saying, "As in, what's it your business what I earn?" The child says, "No, Dad, just tell me." He said, "I earn £50 an hour." The child said, "Thank you, that's all I needed to know." Child moved on. A couple of days later, came to the father, didn't say anything. On the third day, the child came and said, "Dad, would you mind giving me £25? That moment the dad said, "What do you mean £25? Get out, go and do something else." When the child walked away, the father then thought to himself, this child never asks me for money. When the child has now come to ask me for money, I want to know what's the reason the child's come to ask. So the father felt a bit guilty, went and took £25. When the child had left the house, under the pillow of the child, he was going to put the £25. When he removed the pillow, he saw there's another £25 there already. So when he put the other 25, it comes to 50. When the child came back, the father looked at the child and said to the child, "Why did you ask me for £25 when you've already got £25? The child replied, "Because my father, you said that you earn £50 an hour. But it seems that you're more concerned with your hours of work than your hours with your children. Therefore, I wanted to collect £50 so I could pay you, so you spend one valuable hour with me." The point that was brought forward is that the role of the father in the 21st century is how much time they spend with their child. The more time that is spent, the more obedience and encouragement and guidance there is. Yet the Imam in Risalat al-Huquq turns the table. Instead of looking at what the role of the father is, the Imam turns the table by saying, what's the right of the father on the child? And that's why when you read his words, as we're going to examine now, you'll see he takes you to the very essence of what your father really is in your life. Let's see what he says. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَمَا حَقُّ أَبِيكَ فَتَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ أَصْلُكَ وَأَنَّكَ فَرْعُهُ وَأَنَّكَ لَوْلَاهُ لَمْ تَكُنْ. The right of your father, number one, in the examination, is that you know that he is your root and you are his branch, and that without him you would not be. What does he mean? We all know very well that if it wasn't for our fathers, we would not be born today. As in, part of the consummation of a marriage is the coming together of the husband and the wife. When the father comes together with the wife, of course the mother has that period of the pregnancy of the 9 months, in which we are indebted to our mothers. Yet at the same time, were it not for our father coming together with our mother, we would not be. And therefore, on the most basic level, every human being would not come were it not for a father. Therefore, when the statement comes forward and says the right of your father is that you know he is your root, the essence of the meaning is that there is a sense of pride in the human being when they know who their root is, that their root is their father. The reason also the Imam said this is because when you look in the world today and throughout history, this is not necessarily the case for every human being. Why? Because there are many in the world today who do not know who their root is. Meaning what? Meaning it's easy for us to say that we know who our father is. Yet throughout history, the worst social stigma is being born not knowing who your dad is. Because when you look at many of these television shows, whether it be Mr. Springer or Maori or whatever their names are, you find the lady comes forward and there is a child. Who's the father? A person comes in. Is it him? No, it's not him. A second comes in. Is it him? No, it's not him. 10 minutes later, they're still going through people and still they don't know who the father is. You find that there is a stigma in the human, that many a human does not develop when they do not know who their root is. When the Imam says the right of your father is that you know he is your root and you are the branch, it applies on a broader spectrum. That the greatest honor of a human is when they know who their dad is. That when it comes, for example, to the schooling system, every child can see their father when their father comes to pick them up. Except there being one child. Who's your father? I've never met my father. that child has to live with a stigma of not knowing who the root is. Because the mother may have been in so many adulterous situations that the child doesn't know which one his father was. Or you may find that the mother may have been with many partners, and that one of these partners who brought about this child ran away. The child grows up in an environment where they seek all their lives to look for their root, yet they are never told who their root is. And that, of course, damages society as a whole. Why? Because knowing that your father is a root brings you stability in your life. You have a father to look up to and a mother to look up to. But when you live in a society where you do not know who your father is, that continues to affect you psychologically in every surrounding. And that's why when you look at the beginning of the history of this religion, many of the most revered companions of Rasulullah faced the stigma in their life. Why? Because amongst the most revered companions of Rasulullah, there were some who didn't know who their root was. And they had to live with that for the rest of their life. For example, Ammar ibn al-As occupies a prominent position in Islamic history. That when it comes to the companions of Rasulullah, many list him as one of the most notable companions. As in Ammar ibn al-As became governor of Egypt in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and then later on became governor for Muawiyah, when Muawiyah ruled Bilad al-Sham. Ammar ibn al-As, throughout his life, there was one stigma which remained on his shoulder. What was it? Not knowing who his root was. Why? His mother used to have a job. She used to keep a red flag outside her house. I think electricity changed it now to a light. But in those days, his mother used to have a job where there was a red flag outside the house. Of course, this red flag would be a sign that anybody is more than welcome to enter the house. And this mother would grow in that type of environment, where the pleasures were more than allowed to be looked after. What used to happen is that many men would come towards the house until the mother gave birth. When the mother gave birth, they were not sure who the father was. And so therefore, someone has to be the father. There were 6 likely candidates, judging by the appearances. And so what happened was, these 6 candidates, their name was put in a bowl. When their name was put in a bowl, they came forward and they picked out the name. Like lottery, when you come and you pick it out, they came and they picked out the name. Which name came out? Al-As ibn Wa'il. Al-As ibn Wa'il was the name that came out, and therefore Amr, who was he called? He was called Amr ibn al-As. Did he know whether this father is truly his? No, he didn't. Why? Because when Surah Al-Kawthar was revealed, it didn't allow him to know who his father really was. Why? Because Al-As ibn Wa'il had one particular characteristic, and that used to be, he used to always mock Rasulullah whenever Rasulullah's babies would be born. Because you know Rasulullah had sons who had died from a very young age. Al-As ibn Wa'il, when he heard about the first son, would make fun of Rasulullah. When he heard about the second son dying, he would make fun of Rasulullah. And he would come forward and say, Rasulullah is abtar. Abtar means what? Because you know in the Quran it says, Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar, fasalli li rabbika wanhar, inna shani'aka huwal abtar. Abtar means the line which is cut. He used to make fun of Rasulullah, that when Rasulullah would walk in the middle of the street, he would come to him and he would say, your line is abtar. There is nobody to continue your line, because if your sons Qasim and Ibrahim have both died, who is there who's going to continue your lineage? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. We have given you Fatima. Fatima will continue that lineage. Has that lineage broken until today? No, it hasn't. There are still from the lineage of Fatima to Zahra people until today. But the Quran said to Al-As ibn Wa'il, Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. It's not Rasulullah's line which is cut. It's your line. You do not have a line. Therefore, Amr ibn al-As cannot be Amr ibn al-As. Because the Quran said his father's line was cut. And that's why you find Amir al-Mu'mineen at Saffin doesn't call him by his father's name. He says to him, O son of Nabigha. Why? Because he wants to make it clear to him, I know very well that you do not know who your father is. And that's why the statement came about, and it's important to realize that this statement has a context, because I've heard some speakers who've generalized it in a way which doesn't befit their education. That the son of adultery will never love Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's not a general statement. It has a context. Do not apply it to everybody as some people do and then come forward with conclusive statements. No. Because there are many who it's not their fault from where they came. Yet they